Welcome to Scorched Earth, and a general mid-month reading for the sign of Virgo, Sun, Moon and Ascendant for the month of October. It's going to be shorter than the main monthly readings because actually it's only covering that 2-week period from the 15th to the 31st of October. And to keep it nice and short, I'm going to endeavour not to pull any clarifiers, but I'm totally open to breaking my own rules if I need to. So I'm switching up the format a little bit this month. Normally, what I would do is pull 3 cards for your current energy, 3 cards for what's coming towards you, and then 3 cards of advice. But actually, I don't feel like that really, now I've sat and thought about it, really fits with how I like to read. I'm very preoccupied with the self in the moment, right? I'm a fire sign, so I am about what's going on here and now. But what's coming towards you is coming towards you. There's nothing you can do about that. What we can do is look for the lesson, right? The energy that you're in at the moment, what is that trying to teach you? And how does that ready you for what's coming in, coming towards you, whatever that might be? So instead of what's coming towards you, what we're going to do is have that third line be, what is the lesson? Form a point of introspection, which may or may not help you kind of detach from whatever you're feeling at the moment. And I kind of feel like whatever you're feeling at the moment, it's stress related, right? I meditated on your energy for a little bit, and see, when we're meditating, we're looking for changes in the body, changes in how you are feeling right now, or certainly I do anyway, because that often gives me an insight into how the person that I'm reading for is feeling. Now for you, what I noticed was I was actually sat in prayer. I had my hands clasped together, I was on the table, my knees are on the floor, and I was like, I'm praying here. That's interesting. Not something that I am prone to do particularly, but that I found quite interesting. And then when I was trying to select the deck that I was going to use for you, I'm fucking eyelid twitching away, which is stress for me. When I get stressed, I don't often notice that I'm stressed, but I have a few key indicators that point me towards the fact that I'm stressed. Twitching eyelid is one of them. So, knowing that I am not stressed at this point in time, I feel this might be you. So, can I have 3? Let's just start doing it again. I've mentioned it, right? 3 cards for Virgo's current energy, please. That's one straight off the table. Where's it even gone? Just there. We have Temperance, okay. We have the Queen of Wands. And we have the Ace of Cups. This is intriguing because none of these things are particularly stressful. We've got Justice here and the 8 of Cups. So maybe what I'm experiencing is a reduction in stress, the removal of stress, right? It's kind of been bringing itself to my attention to show me what it is that you're moving away from. So we have Temperance here, card of Sagittarius in the Major Arcana. We have the Queen of Wands, which is strictly Aries energy, but it is about being in the moment, right? And then we have this Ace of Cups. Now, as these all relate together, the Temperance card is very, very, well, it's a really interesting card because strictly its elemental designation is fire, right? Because it's a card of Sagittarius, but it is always depicted with water of some description on the card, right? And this one particularly shows somebody who is actually under the water. It's not immediately obvious, but she sat at the side of a well in a lake, right? It's called Keeper of the Well. She's a mermaid, in fact. And for me, Temperance always talks about healing off the back of difficult circumstances, right? And here, we've got someone who is sitting under the water. The water indicates emotion, feelings, all that sort of thing. And she's still. She is calm, right? The water isn't muddied in any way. It's not, swishing around and knocking all the silt everywhere. She is there. And not only is she in the water, so in her emotions, she's also readying herself to lower that cup down into a well that is underneath the already water, right? Now, this is interesting because we are currently in a Mercury retrograde, right? And it's in Scorpio. And Scorpio is concerned with, creation and destruction. sex and death and all these extremes, right? So when Mercury retrograde in Scorpio occurs, what you've got is an energetic push to deal with things that are of a darker nature, right? The sort of stuff that you don't look at very often. And it feels like this is where you are at the moment, right? It's perhaps it's about taking responsibility for some things. Perhaps it's about sort of just dropping that amphora down into the well and seeing what comes up. Maybe you're not entirely aware of what is lurking around in the darkness there. Maybe some of you are aware of it, and up until this point you've been a little afraid to face it. But it feels like you understand innately now that if balance is to occur, whatever's at the bottom of that well needs to come up and it needs to be examined. Perhaps it needs to be released out into the water, you know, to kind of spread away and release. Excuse the way I'm falling over my words. Like, it's a classic side effect of retrograde energy. It's just communication is really, really difficult. Mercury retrograde, anyway. It's combined with the Queen of Wands, and this is really interesting because, like I said, she's Aries energy, and Aries is currently in retrograde as well. It's just to add to the shit show. But of all the queens, and she's not your queen, right? Let's face it, Queen of Pentacles is your queen. She's the one who moves around the most, I think. The rest of the queens will feel very static to me, but there's something very energetic about the Queen of Wands. You may have seen an uptick in the amount of actual physical energy that you have. So Wansu is very physical, you know. Actually straddles quite nicely the physical realm and something beyond, you know, where creativity comes from, whatever that is. But it feels like you're starting to straighten up a little bit now, Virgo. You've been at points this year in a dark place, and it's almost like you've had to wait for the water to settle, right? Or whatever the storm was over the top, you've got to wait for that to pass. And over time, right, the water that you've been sat in is starting to clear. The silt is, you know, dropping back down onto the floor. And it's finding its peace. Now, your card is the Hermit, and that is very much, you know, associated with introspection and actually kind of deep analysis. This, interestingly, makes me feel like you're kind of turning away from that a little bit. It feels more like you are leaning on the other elements at the moment to get the insight that you need. And whether that's because you don't really trust your mind at the moment, which is possible, or whether it is that you see the value of what the other elements have to offer. Like, it feels like you're getting out there and you're doing things a little better than you have been doing before. And I think, God, did it come up in your last reading that maybe you just weren't taking care of yourself very well? I think it did. The Queen of Wands says to me here that you're kind of sitting up a bit straighter now. You're paying attention to those things, you know. You're starting to notice that you have tells. It's back again. There we go. Thank you. That you have tells that show you where you are, right? And maybe just as I have realised that this is something to do with stress, even though I don't really acknowledge stress when I feel it. It's like I don't recognise it. I don't understand it. So you are seeing now that you have tells that show you when you are in a particular frame of mind that perhaps you had not noticed before. And you've had to wait for everything to settle before you got to that point, right? But now you're here, and it's like you can act on things now as they're coming to your attention. I know I got some messages after the last Virgo reading from people saying, I hadn't realised, but actually as I was listening to you, I could just tick all those boxes. Yes, I have been abandoning myself on all of these levels, right? I'm not eating properly, not drinking properly, not taking my meds, haven't been outside for a walk for, you know, an age. I can barely brush my teeth, you know, and it's the thing with depression and the thing with, you know, with dealing with really difficult feelings. Quite often you don't realise how in the middle of it you've been, until you start coming out the other side and you look back and you go, holy shit, I've been in a really, really dark place. How did I not realize? Because we know there's something wrong with us. We know that it's not quite right, but truly perceiving what has occurred really only happens once you're moving away from it, and it feels like you're moving away from it. And we've got this Ace of Cups here. Now, there are lots of ways to interpret this card, and it can be new love and you know, all that sort of thing for a person, a place, a thing, or whatever. But it can also be about forgiveness and compassion, right? And specifically when it's turned towards yourself. And I think that you are looking at yourself a bit more kindly than you have been of late, right? And it's interesting that you're kind of detaching your analytical brain away from that. Maybe some of you are seeing that possibly that has been the seat of the problem. But now it's about being gentle with yourself. It's about being careful with yourself. And understanding that sometimes things are just as they are. That's it. Sometimes it's not possible to pull something apart and examine every single last speck of it to get closure, is what I wanted to say there. And that will certainly be true for some of you. No, I think closure is what I'm going for there, because what you truly want is to be able to understand something, and you want to be able to understand it so that you can release it, close it out, move on, all of these things. But it feels like you understand that your brain's been hamstringing you a little bit here. So overthinking, which is something that you are prone to, it's something that you default to quite often, and possibly is something that you've been dealing with a lot this year. It's not helping you. So taking a step back and detaching just a little bit from it, and being, you know, and being with yourself how you would be if you had a friend that you could see was walking down this path, right? Because you'd be totally there for them. And it's astonishing how we show up for people that we care about, and we do not ever show up for ourselves sometimes, you know. I think you're starting to show up for yourself. Maybe not fully yet, but you're giving yourself a bit of a breather. You're giving yourself a bit of a break, right? And this is really important, because what we've got here is the Justice card at the bottom of the deck here, right? It's about equilibrium. It's about fairness. It's about things being right. I think for you, there's been some realization, actually, there's been some realization that things aren't always just, and things aren't always fair. And, you know, I just heard a thing there, and I don't think it's relevant for all of you, but I think it's maybe relevant for some of you, and I'm going to pull it up even though it's slightly difficult. Some of you have been hoping that somebody who wronged you would get punished, like there would be some divine, you know, universe intervention, and they would get that karmic slap that they deserve for hurting you so badly. And what you've realised is, A, that it's probably not coming, at least not in the form that you want it to. But I also feel for some of you, there's a realisation that that feeling in and of itself is not a healthy one, right? This is by no means for all of you, but I see you walking away from the need to see that occur. And that's really important, right? Because closure occurs in here. Whatever's going on outside of you, karmic justice or no, right? That shouldn't make any difference to how you perceive your ending here, right? Just for a couple of you, but I just wanted to bring that in there. Eyelids twitching furiously again. There's movement, and it's slow, but it's happening. It's low level, but it's happening. I think you've been doing a bit of faking it until you make it, but your internal space is starting to take steps to catch up with what you are projecting outside, right? Let's have a look and see what this energy is all about, why it's here. I would love for my eyelid to stop twitching anytime soon. About this lesson, this point of introspection. That's really interesting. So, we've got the Knight of Pentacles at the bottom of the deck, and if you've watched any of my videos before, you'll know that I see the Page and the Knight and the Queen as different levels of understanding the value of something. Right now, the Knight of Pentacles is also the card of Virgo, and it says to me that you are making progress, you are taking those small steps here, but do not underestimate exactly what is going on underneath, because, well, fuck shit, it's even deeper than I thought it was. What we've got here is growth, really painful, slow moving, but ultimately very, worthy growth. The card that's underneath that is the World. Right, you're coming to the end of a cycle, and perhaps you're coming to the end of several cycles, because 2020 has been pretty rough on you, Virgo, in a lot of ways, and I think that 2019 wasn't particularly kind to you either, right? So as 2020 is beginning to, as we're in the autumn and it's kind of coming to a close, we've got that notion of that closing out there. So, but it feels like there's something bigger than that as well, because you are so different now to who you were just at the beginning of the year, certainly to who you were last year. The way that you see the world, the lens that you use to view it is different, right? It's not warped, it's not distorted, but it has felt like that at times over this year. I think that it's starting to widen a little, and certainly there's an element of things kind of coming to completion and moving on, right? And as I was saying with the cards before, for some of you, it's realizing that the things that you wanted, that you thought would form closure for you, actually at this point now, if they presented to you, they probably wouldn't close things out at all, because that work would still need to be done inside, right? So we've got the High Priestess, the Four of Swords, and the Ten of Wands in this introspective layer. I think probably of all the signs, you're the one least needing to, have a point of introspection, being hermits as you are. But I'm intrigued in this notion of you dropping the analytical aspect of it, right? And here's the High Priestess immediately. There seems to be something entirely more holistic and intuition driven going on here, right? Perhaps you're feeling like you're being guided down a particular path, or you've got a little tug in the, in your stomach pulling you some way or another. But she is all about feeling, right? And just as it could well be there. These two, not only are they sitting like this on my table, but I'm drawn to the fact that the pool at the bottom of the High Priestess's feet could well be the pool that Temperance angel mermaid thing is sitting in here, right? Oh, beg your pardon me, I should sit the other way around, but I was just drawn to the imagery straight away. I made the observation once in one of Taurus's videos that they struggled to see, or they struggled to understand the difference, right, between their intuition and that voice in the back of their head that needled them so very hard. And what I said to them was, if it hurts you when the voice speaks, it's not your intuition. If it seeks to blame, it's not your intuition. If it makes you attribute responsibility to anything other than you for whatever it is, it's not your intuition, right? And I feel like that's why you're stepping down the analysis, because I think there may have been, for some of you, this kind of, I don't want to say victimization, because there's so many pejorative overtones to that, but there's certainly an element of being tortured to the point of being a victim at points this year. Yeah? I see you stepping away from that internal narrative. And the High Priestess, she's the keeper of secrets. She's a holder of all, wisdom and knowledge. She doesn't really volunteer it. It's a very internal process. And I think that you're starting to separate out the over-analytical side of you, the one that self-sabotages and overthinks, away from, what is trying to guide you in a particular direction. And it's interesting that the next card that you should have out there is the Four of Swords, which is my card of meditation. It's about detached consideration for things. It's about detaching in order to heal from things, right? So whereas the hermit energy by nature tends to head off into the cave with the lantern, go looking for the things, looking for the answers that are held therein. The Four of Swords is kind of, it's a similar energy, but it's about standing back from it, right? It feels like you can employ an element of objectivity. It's like you can give that distance from the situation to begin the process of healing, notion that is also repeated in the Temperance card there. There's a tree in the background of this card, and it's actually got the body of a woman. It's like she's been turned into a tree at some point. But the way she is standing in the card, it kind of looks like she's being crucified. And I feel like at points this year, you have felt like you have been in the midst of some sort of crucifixion. Look in the background here. There. See? It's a woman. I think you're pulling yourself down off that cross now, Virgo. And with this detachment seems to come this slow realization that it's... What I want to say is what's happened has happened. And now you can choose. You can choose to stay in that crucified position, or you can choose to step down from that, and you can choose to heal. It's actually all down to you now, and I think that your intuition is telling you that it's time to pull yourself down off this cross. It's time for you to start living a little more, because like I was saying before, I don't think that you realise how burdened you have been. The mind is a spectacular thing, and whilst it does all sorts of terrible things to us, and performs all sorts of mental gymnastics to keep our ego, intact, the other thing that it does is, in moments of great grief and shock and all of those things, kind of slams down the shutters on a lot of it straight away, and it drip feeds it to you at a pace that you can deal with. Now, for a lot of you, I think that those shutters have been down for most of the year, and I think that you have not been quite as aware as you could be of how much you have been affected by this. And from a personal anecdote, after my husband died in 2005, I thought it was fine. I thought it was absolutely fine. I had two children to think of. I had my in-laws to think of, and they didn't live very far away from me at all. I was just like 3 minutes down the road in the next village. And I was so engrossed in the act of making sure that my children were okay, in the act of making sure that my in-laws were okay. Just little practical things, making sure bringing the coal in for them, making sure they had food, all that kind of thing, checking on them all the time, holding space for them to express their grief where they needed to, being overly present almost for my children, so that not at any point did they ever feel like they were alone, you know. I was so engrossed in that act that for a full year, like, I did not grieve at all, and I just thought that was fine. I just thought I was normal, because obviously it's just because I was really, really strong. But it wasn't. It was a trick of my mind, because it was too much for me to deal with in one go, and it swerved immediately to practical considerations, and they were other people. There were other people who were grieving, there were other people who needed me, and so I stepped into that role. Towards the end of that year, that 12-month period, I realised I was doing some really crazy things. I'm not going to, but just like odd things. And I kept catching myself and like, why am I doing stuff like that? That's really weird. And it was my subconscious kind of knocking on the inside of my head, going, hello, hello, I'm ready to start talking about this now. And when I started letting it leak out a little bit, I was gobsmacked by just how much stuff there was in there. And I was gobsmacked by how my brain had managed to hold that away from me until I was ready to start dealing with it. I don't think you're ever truly ready to deal with it, but sometimes you're in a better space than others. And certainly, you know, it did me a favour at that point, because what I did do was necessary. What I did focus my attention on was necessary. But I felt like I was going crackers towards the end of that year, until I realised what was going on, until I realised that I had, you know, not dealt with my grief, but in fact just held it in abeyance at the side there, you know. I feel like this is a little bit like what's going on with you here, Virgo, you know, and turning your eye inward without the critical nature that you can sometimes display towards yourself, with something a bit more gentle, something a bit more focused on healing and regeneration, and to some degree, at some point, I mean, practical matters, but there isn't a single pentacle on the board here. This is all swords and wands and water, you know. I think the true extent of what you have suffered will be becoming obvious to you, right? But by the same token, the work that you have done this year, even whilst in the midst of, you know, grief and loss and shock and suffering, has brought you to this point where you are now, where you are ready to look at these things, where you are ready to start making plans, loose plans, certainly, and at this point probably not even plans, but choosing life, choosing to live rather than choosing to exist. And there is, as we know, a difference. Let's get you some advice, Virgo. Ooh. Some advice for Virgo, please. Thank you. Yeah. I mean, at the bottom of the deck here, we've got the Four of Cups. And in this case, I think it's talking about how you have retreated, how you pulled in from things, you know. And it might well be that you have reached out of you for, you know, support on some sort of level. You know, you've spoken to people, you've talked to people, you've relayed, you know, the information. People understand what it is that you've gone through intellectually. But have you A, really truly expressed what has happened in here this year? Probably not, right? You've given them the edited highlights, but nobody really understands, right? 2, though, have you really taken on board what those who are around you, those who care for you, those who have tried to support you, has anything that they said actually really got in there with you, Virgo? Because what I can see as I'm talking to you here is kind of like, I don't know, like a fence panels, you know, with knot holes in, and it's almost like what you've allowed to come through these knot holes in this fence panel are those things that kind of agree with what it is that you've been feeling, like any particular bit of it, right? And it's probably very little to do with you, right, and how you are feeling about these things. It's more about what has occurred, right? So you invite that in, and that's allowed in, and that's there, but everything else kind of hits the fence. So people's care and attention to you as a human being, right? Are you eating? Are you taking care of yourself? Are you doing these things, right? That's all just been falling on deaf ears because it's not forming part of the chink of what you want to talk about here. Now, that is a really, really usual kind of reaction to grief, because you are so focused on one thing. You know, think about the Five of Cups energy, right? You're not seeing those two cups behind you. You're not seeing that emotional support behind you. Your mind is completely focused on what you've lost. And, you know, you haven't lost you. You've lost something else. So therefore, the focus isn't on you. Does that make sense? Anywho, the first card that came flying out for advice is Justice. It's not the first time that's come out in your reading here. Now, it's the card of Libra, and we are in Libra season at the moment, so it could just be a nod to the timing. But it also feels like balance and equilibrium is what you need to be aiming for. You know, not huge, giant steps and things, like your internal space and getting that as best you can possibly manage to a point of balance should be a focus for you now. And that does necessarily require you actually taking whatever it is that's happened to you this year away from being the major point of focus for you, right? Picking it up and putting it to the side, because now it needs to be about you and your healing and your balance and your, you know, your equilibrium and who you are now, because you're not the same person. Bits of you are the same, you know, in the same things inside fundamentally have shifted, and it's almost like you need to get to know who you are now as much as anything else, right? Because death and loss of any description changes you. It makes you different, and it can take a while for you to catch up with who you are now. Yeah. But to get to that point, you are going to have to be scrupulously honest with yourself about everything. Absolutely honest. Now, the other things that we've got here, the other cards that flew out, Seven of Wands, and the Two of Cups and the Two of Wands together. Now, as advice, the Seven of Wands, it's an interesting card. We see somebody who's planted themselves in this you know, waterfall. He looks relatively sturdy, but he is kneeling on a rock, and he is in the middle of a fucking torrent of water, right? That's your emotion. That could be, well, you know, the emotion starting to leak out of the situation, right? Rather than being damned as it is, right? Now you're letting it out. We see this person feeling like under attack, right? And it can mean all sorts of things. It can be, you know, fighting from the high ground and all that kind of thing. But he's being defensive, and we have no idea who's actually attacking him. Like, we can see the ones, they are there. But it feels like this is kind of how you have been with people, right? They can get so far, they can talk about the things that you want to talk about, but where they want to talk about you and how you're looking after yourself and how you're recovering and how you're healing and all that kind of thing, like it just falls on deaf ears because it's not your point of focus at the moment, right? I think you need to put the one down a little bit. Like I said, shift the focus, right? But this is really, really interesting because this is crossroads energy here, right? When somebody comes to the Two of Wands, it's about realizing that you've hit a fork in the road, right? And what we do with these metaphoric forks in the road is generally speaking, probably doesn't apply to Aries, to be honest, but for most other people, what we do is we mentally walk down those roads, okay? And we see if the place that you will necessarily end up by following that path is one that appeals to you, you know, the consequences of taking that path over the other. And once we have done that process, once we have considered that, then we pick a path and we head down it, you know. The two is very much the internal space for me, numerically speaking. Right? High Priestess is 2. And then we've got the Two of Cups. Now, this is interesting because I feel like it's speaking to what I was just talking about there, about what you are allowing to penetrate the wall at the moment. I feel like there's a lot, certainly not when it refers to you anyway. And so your crossroads that you are at, right, feels, and forgive me if this sounds a little blunt, but your crossroads is, do you stay with whatever relationship this is that you have lost, in whichever way you have lost it, whether through bereavement or divorce or whatever? And I know a lot of Virgos have been experiencing that. Do you stay with the memory of that and the pain of that ending, which is where you are right now, or do you choose to let it go? Do you choose to release it? Do you choose to head down another path and trust that these feelings that you're experiencing at the moment will not last forever? I'll pull another card for that one. You know, it's interesting. We've got a woman here with a crystal ball. She stood on what appears to be castle ramparts, right? So she's up and she's detached from what is around her, and she's trying to work a thing out. Down here, you know, we've got intimacy depicted, and that doesn't have to be a romantic relationship. This could be a friendship. This could be, you know, could be anything like that. What has gone and what has been lost. At this point, I don't think it's coming back. Right? Obviously, for some of you, it definitely isn't coming back. But that does not mean that you cannot experience intimacy. That does not mean that you need to stay walled up in a castle for the rest of your life. It does not mean that you can't find meaning in your life moving forwards. It's the Fool. Card of Aries. It's the card of a new start. It's a card of liberation. It's a card of freedom and allowing yourself to trust in a new way, in a new path. Got the Five of Pentacles at the bottom here. Followed by the Ace of Swords and the Ten of Swords. Right? Realize what has ended. Right? The truth of the matter is that in some ways you have clung to it, and in some ways you have done so to your own physical detriment. Right? With the Five of Pentacles, that is a card that talks to me about not meeting your own basic needs. It's like you've been out walking in the snow for a year almost. I'm not suggesting that everything will be, you know, sunshine and rainbows moving forwards. I'm not suggesting that you should make yourself feel like sunshine and rainbows are things that you want to fill your life with at the moment. However, you have started down a path of healing. You have started down this path of actually creating closure for yourself on here. Right? And once you hit that point, this really is where you want to be headed next. Wow. Okay, I'm going to leave it there, Virgo. I hope that you found something useful here for you. God, these were supposed to be really short. They've ended up being longer than the fucking monthly readings. I don't know what's going on. It was exactly the same for Capricorn. I've just done that, and that was like 40 odd minutes too. So yeah, if you've stuck with me this long, thank you. I appreciate your attention. I hope that you found something useful here for you. Yeah, so know that I love you all, and I'll speak to you soon.